Hi there, I'm Cassia Streb with Music for Your Inbox, and today we are going to chat with M.A. Harms, who is a composer and a performer, a performance artist, and also a percussionist, instrument builder. Anyhow, I'll invite them and they can let you know all about what they are up to. So I'm just going to invite them now. Hello, Margot.
Hi, Cassia.
Nice to see you.
You too. How are you?
We're doing really well. I'm really excited to talk about your work today because as I started thinking about your video, I've watched it several times now, and I was there and the day was made. I've been thinking a lot about you as an artist and where you come from and how it, like artistically speaking, come from, and how this has sort of led into this piece that you've created for us that we're releasing. It's sort of, I feel like it's a little hard to know exactly where to start. So maybe you could talk about this work, because I know that this is a multi-chapter work that you've presented and you've been working on in sections, and that the Music for Your Inbox presentation is the latest chapter. I don't know if it's the final chapter, but it's certainly like the most recent. And then I think we can get into your work as I was trying to introduce you, and I was thinking, oh, well, they build instruments and they invent things, but then they're a composer and a writer, and I sort of created like a giant list. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about how this multi-chapter piece came into being?
Yeah. Well, I've been interested in composing for a long time, but I was scared to start. It's scary when you're first trying to think I want to do this, but I don't know what to do. And I've always been writing since I was a kid, and so I just decided to start writing letters. I was with a group of friends in Devil's Lake in Wisconsin, which is this really beautiful lake, and we were sitting at a picnic table by the water, and I just suddenly remembered being a kid in Oregon with my parents on the beach, and a very specific moment came to me, and I just started writing about it. And I had like an 8-page letter when I left, and the letter was mostly just describing like visual things I remembered and small, like little details that when you say them alone don't mean much, but the collective experience was so formative for me. And I just decided the best way to process it was to turn it into a soundscape. So I started taking all of these specific scenes I was describing in the letter and sonify them and just rebuild that moment and let people hear how that sounded and felt to me 20 some years later. And then it just continued. And so that first letter was sort of just a letter to myself as a child and remembering things about being a kid that I hadn't thought about in a long time, but being at the lake reminded me of. And it evolved, and I continued to write letters to other people that I couldn't talk to anymore for whatever reason. So I have a letter to an old partner that I don't want to speak to, but I wanted like something to help finally like conclude and just to help with my like closing off that chapter of my life finally.
Right. Right.
Then I have a letter to my mom that I wrote. It was coming up to one of the anniversaries of her passing. I think it was the 3rd year. And I was starting to wrap up college, so it felt like a monumental time to write something to her and talk about it. And so this final letter I wrote this year, and I've just come up on 3 years and living out here in California now, coming from Wisconsin. But my parents are both from the West Coast. My mom grew up in San Luis Obispo, and my dad is from Eugene, Oregon, and they love the West Coast, and they always wanted to come back to the West Coast. And it's been my goal since I was in middle school that I would come back too. And so now here I am. I'm a year out of grad school, and I'm doing a lot of cool things that I never even imagined I would be doing when I came here. And it felt really appropriate to kind of like summarize this chapter of my life and tell it to my parents again, because they always wanted to come back and they didn't get to. And I did, and that's one of the hardest things. I think I just want to call them and be like, guess what I got to do today?
Right.
And so kind of got to sonify that with my mannequin instruments instead. And so it's sort of just each like little station I go to, because they're just a bunch of stations with like a soundscape that builds into the overall event.
Yeah, because I mean, we could talk a little bit about the just the actual physical structure of the scene, if we can sort of try and paint a picture for everyone. Although people can just go to the Instagram feed and see many images of what you created, but I'll kind of describe a little bit because I have the outsider perspective, and then maybe you can fill in. But in the piece, there is a large writing desk and a lamp, and that's where we sort of encounter. I don't know. Do you identify as the main human person in this? Because I know you're wearing a mask the entire time. Does it feel like it's you, or does it feel like it's another character?
I feel like it's kind of my artist self.
Your artist self. Okay, so Margot, the artist self, is in the video writing.
Me as the performer.
Right. With a doll's mask that's been sewn onto a headdress, so we really don't see any of your actual human facial expressions.
Yeah.
But your body is your body, and then you're going around, and there are these stations beside the desk of mannequins or pieces of mannequins that you have changed and altered and turned into musical instruments that you interact with. So that's sort of like the cliff notes and the least interesting version, but just so that people have an idea in their mind. I know that when we were making the film, that you had assigned names and characteristics and almost personality traits to each of these instrument objects. Do you want to just kind of like do a little roll call and sort of say who they are and what they are?
Sure. So the first instrument that I interact with after leaving the desk is Smelly, which is an abbreviation of snare belly that my partner endearingly nicknamed her, that caught on. And I think actually the names mostly come from my partner, but he does a big part in helping me with them. Like, we don't have a ton of tools. All I own is a power drill. So, like, everything that is done is with a power drill and very janky, and it takes two of us to hold them down because they're not flat or easy to navigate. They're really hard to drill into. And so it's a really big ritual for my partner and I, and a way for us to interact together. So he takes great pride in naming them, and then they just kind of latch. So Snelly is an abbreviation for snare belly, and in my head, she's a very serious instrument, but the name is super goofy, and I think that I like that, actually. I think it like ties into the process of making them, because it is very joyful and therapeutic to make them with my partner, and I'm really trying not to make everything so heavy all the time, because in my first few years here, everything I made was like very, very heavy about grief, and there's a lot of anger and sadness, and those are still like key principles to me, and I think will always influence everything I do, but I don't want it to be the core of everything. So having these silly, goofy names is very healing to me. So that's the first one, is Snelly, and then the next one we just called Leg. There was no fun name for it. It's just a leg.
It is a leg. To be fair, it is a great name, and it's incredibly helpful when we're setting the lights and what have you too. It's the leg. We should mention it's a prosthetic leg. It's not a prosthetic. It's a mannequin's leg. So it's not human
leg. It's got like a big brace on it, and so it's really the leg brace, and the leg is just holding the brace together. I think the brace is more the instrument than the actual leg, but it's only referred to as leg. And then there's the gut wrencher, and that one was definitely named at the height of the angst period. That one's just a hollowed out male torso full of bottle caps and bells, and there's crumpled up bits of poetry from various projects, so it's holding all of the words from every time I've used it, which feels really important to me. I like that it carries on the history of its use. And that one, I don't think there's like really very much playful to it. That one is just kind of like sad It's the gut wrencher.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally is the Mantar,
Yeah.
which
Yes.
is
Say more.
it's supposed to be a mannequin guitar. It is
Mm-hmm.
very, very far from an actual guitar, but I do love it, and it functions kind of similarly to a guitar. I really didn't know very much about guitars when I was building this. My mentor, Nick Deo, helped me with it a lot. And I don't think he realized how little I knew about guitars until I started. I didn't know that it needed a bridge. Like, I hadn't known. I was like, why doesn't this work?
Well, it's great that he was able to help with that. In fact, he was the person who ended up doing the audio mix. I don't mean ended up. I meant like at the end of the process is the one who's making the audio mix after we had recorded it so that we could really bring out all of these. Because what you're describing are these instruments that you have built, and then they're kind of creating these tiny sounds, but then the space we recorded in was vast and giant and huge and extraordinarily reverberant.
Mm-hmm.
But then you were using a lot of loops and contact mics and stuff. So it's sort of recording that an event has occurred, but not a lot of the subtleties and like the bits of what the sounds were. So in the live space, we're hearing all of that. But then in the sort of replay and these loops, it's not supposed to lose that. It's just that kind of disappears so that we can hear the detail in the in the foreground of the things that are happening now. So I feel like Nick understanding your work was a really important part of that, because then he knew what to bring out and what to mask. And that's sort of, this whole video has felt like I've gotten to know your community as an artist, because a lot of people were helping you on this who care deeply about your work and who influence you and you're influenced by. And because I know that also Eric Leonardson was running a lot of the tech and stuff. And it's interesting to think of your piece as a solo artist, because I know that your sense of community is really important to you.
Oh, yes. I heavily rely on community. I don't really like doing things like fully alone, and I don't ever plan on doing. I always want to work with people, but the people that ended up being involved in this, I'm really excited about. Like, he helped me make the very first mannequin that I turned into an instrument, and Eric is the first friend that I made here. Like, when I moved here, Tim Feeney put us together, and we were talking online, and we started going on hikes over the summer, which I'm so grateful for, because it ended up being a full year of being alone. Like, everyone was alone and isolated. So getting to meet up with Eric, we started improvising out in outdoor spaces together, and that was my only like tie to the real world and my connection with another person. And so those two getting to be involved in like some of the foundations of my time here in California feels so prominent to what the piece is about, because they massively influenced my time here and are really important people to me.
Yeah. Well, it comes through, because the work is definitely, like the final video that you're showing with us is incredibly personal, and yet it does have this broader sort of community aspect. And that's why I was asking if you felt like you are the performer, or if it's the performer version of you, because there's so many other voices happening inside this piece. There's another collaborator on this project, which was Boss Witch Productions. Sorry, I haven't said that out loud very often. They had gotten you a residency at Coaxial, right, where you were developing earlier chapters of the piece. And then, sorry.
Actually, this is a totally different piece from that. But
okay.
This piece is also a response to that. So that's like one of the chapters that's acknowledged in it. But the piece that I did for Coaxial and Human Resources was like a totally different thing, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Although it was using similar instruments. So I'm just thinking about, are you seeing these mannequins as kind of like a chamber ensemble that you've created, and then you can compose different elements for them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Like, ultimately my goal is to have a whole army of them and do,
Hmm.
like, entire mannequin orchestras. I want them to
Wow.
get to the point that some of them are self-playing, but then there's multiple other people interacting with them, too. That's going to take a lot of time and space, though.
Yeah, I like how you went from orchestra to like military. That was an amazing jump. But also, so it sounds like you're thinking about some of them being automated and then others sort of personed to like have them sound. And then that world, you might be the conductor or director of sorts
Yeah,
or
sometimes.
soloist.
Yeah, I
Um,
really want to get to the point that other people are writing things for them, too, because I think that would be
oh
even more
yeah.
exciting. But it hasn't happened yet. Knock on wood, it does
Yeah, well,
happen soon.
I think it would require some kind of really neat, like creative notation and stuff, just because a lot of those instruments, if I'm thinking about Gut Wrencher, for instance, you talked a little bit about the sounds, and I'd like to, just because that's the stuff that I like.
Yeah,
If we could touch on some of the sounds that these are making, because I think if you had like a text piece or an alternate notation piece, then people could compose pretty readily for your orchestra. But Gut Wrencher is has a bunch of they're plastic bottle caps, right?
yeah,
Connected to strings that are sort of inside, and I know that inside the body of the mannequin. Um, and I know that we had a microphone placed sort of underneath all of that so that we could get all those close sounds. Um, and I know that in the beginning you had thought of it as kind of like a violent sort of move, but then when you heard the final recording, you felt like it was sort of softer and gentler. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
yeah. I was actually really worried that the whole piece was going to sound really angry and violent, just because
Mm.
that's how they've primarily been used up until this point. And I'm really excited that it's not. I think part of what helped round out the sound and make it sound less abrasive is that, well, they were all coming out of different things, but they were feeding into microphones, but like coming out of transducers into different drums that were like, some of them were hidden and some of them weren't.
Mm-hmm.
But the sound of the drum heads, they were all very, very tuned low and loose and kind of flabby. And it
Mm-hmm.
made this like really rounded, like kind of wompy sound. And I think
Yeah.
it softened it. And I love the juxtaposition of using percussion to make things sound less sharp and percussive.
Yeah, I mean it was surprising to me too also because you walk into a room and you see what the instruments are and you sort of assume there's a sound palette and
Yeah.
that's absolutely not what we got in a really fascinating way. I think a moment that sticks out to me is when you approached Snelly and you sang into her as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to whapping, which is what we usually do to drums.
Yeah.
The latter, not the former. Um, and I was just thinking about, is that something that you do a lot of, like singing into drums?
Yeah. Specifically with the snare drum, I don't almost ever play it as an actual drum anymore. I mostly use it as an acoustic amplifier. So I love using my voice, and it's become a really prominent part of my practice. And I like the distortion and the amplification that I get from singing into it. In other projects, I like to use it in my band Placeholder a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll make these massive sound walls, and I'll just be screaming into my drum acoustically, and it's
Yeah.
really, really cool because normally a drum is gonna like, pop out and be on top of things,
Mm-hmm.
but it gets my voice to the point that it's on the edge of the wall, so you can only hear it sometimes, and sometimes you can just tell it's happening, but you can't. But you get like little like waves of it coming through, and I think it's really powerful. I have such a complicated relationship with percussion, and I think like a lot of people, I got so stressed out about being perfect, which is a problem a lot of people have when they're in school for music, and
Mm-hmm.
which is fair, that I kind of gave up for a little bit, and so I started trying to use these tools in a different way that if I did it wrong, no one would know because I didn't see a lot of people doing it.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people will connect with that sentiment of perfectionism, especially in the sort of Western classical music school system.
Oh yeah.
Something that I also loved as being part of the live. I mean, I was sitting in the room when you made the video. Um, was that you began at the table and you're writing, and we can hear there's a contact mic connected to the desk, so it is recording, and then it hits a loop of you writing or of your performer character writing on this paper, and you're sort of sitting at this desk full of crumpled up pieces of paper. So we really get this idea that this has been like going on for quite some time. And then when you leave that space and you head over to Snelly, you like approach her with this incredible tenderness and kindness, and she screams at you. Just like I just really love that, because the entire lead up to that, you had been calling these mannequin instruments by names and sort of assigning these like casual little like personality quirks about these inanimate objects. And of course, I'd never encountered them before. And then you just really, it's beautiful. Your little face that's the mask is leaning into this drum, and there's a very tender song you sing, and she's just like, wah! Like sort of yells at you, and then you sort of like attempt it again, and I was like, oh, I get it. These are alive.
Oh yeah, no, they have their own personalities, and they're gonna do what they want. And I think that's the other thing I love about them is that I have some control, and like I know how to get certain things, but it's never 100%. And I like the finickiness of it. It feels really natural, and I like the parallel of like being anxious about messing things up and not doing things perfect, and the instruments are like, I don't care. This is what I'm doing this time, and this is just how it is. I feel like they give permission to make mistakes and like lean into them and embrace the rawness of them.
Yeah, there's a lot of indeterminacy in your music, but that's not written in a sort of Cagean way necessarily. It's sort of baked into your process, which I think takes a lot of courage.
I've done plenty of things that have not worked because of that, but it's okay because I learned from them too, and I like them just as much.
Well, it reminds me a bit of I have a family member who's a professional downhill ski racer, and he says if you're always in control, you lose all the races. So I feel like your work is right on the edge of control, where you're just like and but that's where the sort of creative energy is coming from, and there's a really powerful performance because you yourself don't actually have complete control over everything. I hope this is coming out right. I don't.
Oh no, you are totally on spot, and you're right.
Okay.
And that's like one of the things that I'm proudest about of my practice. I'm really excited that I'm making things that are like vehemently flawed and embracing the flaws.
Yes, and that comes across. Also, you sort of self-identified as a kind of messy artist at some point during the shoot, and you're saying, I like things that are sort of half broken, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about a part of your work that we haven't discussed yet, because we've been talking a lot about sound. But there's a huge visual element to everything that you're doing, which is part of the reason that we really wanted it to be featured on Music for Your Inbox, because we feel like your work uses the visual world as much, which is clearly an important part of video. Do you consider yourself a visual artist?
Absolutely.
Or is it? Okay, great. So yeah, because I do. So then you've got these, there was a lot of different kinds of textiles involved in this piece. There was like velvet, there was this gigantic cable knit blanket. It looks like one of those comfort blankets or what are those weighted blankets that people have? And then do you want to talk a little bit more about how you plan the look of all those layered textiles?
Oh, absolutely, I do. A big theme and motif for me has been bedrooms and living rooms. Going back to like dwelling in that grief and anger, I was obsessed with creating these spaces that were like extremely intimate. So like for a long time, a lot of my performances took place in giant bedrooms because like it's a place that's very vulnerable, and you're not really supposed to let people into that. Like, that's not somewhere everyone is supposed to see, and like it's very private. And I was trying to open up in a place that felt comfortable to me, but there was also this kind of like teetering, I don't know if I'm really supposed to be doing this. And so bedrooms became the thing. And before that, it was living rooms, just creating this comfortable space that felt safe to talk about things that are not comfortable. And I love the bedrooms and the living rooms, and I'm definitely not getting rid of them, and they're going to continue to be. I will always have like a full stage set for all my performances I do.
Right.
But I'm in this effort of trying to embrace and explore other things that like are a little more softer and deconstructed and maybe intimate, but not as much a punch in your face. I'm going to tell you verbatim my trauma right now. I wanted to deconstruct that. So it's a bunch of like my bed sheets and my bedding from home, but some of them are really important. Like the one that you mentioned, the big cable knit blanket. My stepmom made that for me.
Oh, wow.
It was a graduation gift, and I love it so much, and it's so important, and like it is only like love to me. Like that thing is that's like another tribulation of having like a really beautiful community and support system and network surrounding me. And so like it was really important for me that was there, because that's like my familial representation. And then there were other ones, like on Snelly there's this big fabric, and it's the same fabric that I made the mask out of. And it's also the same fabric I used to like hand sew my coaxial posters. And that's like representation of Boss Witch and the LA community that I've like started to become part of, and the support system that I found out here in the West Coast.
Right.
So yeah, I was just sort of trying to like deconstruct this bedroom and living room and like make it a mind melt of like the importance of writing to me with all of the crumpled paper and the letters, and then all of these like textiles that represent people that support me and make me feel safe and comfortable, and like specific objects that have like specific moments for me. The velvet was from Carmina. It's something she lent me for coaxial, but I just think it's so beautiful.
It is.
That one, yeah.
Well, all that, I mean, that was all coming through in the video. You communicated it really well. I feel like when you talk about these elements, I mean, I don't necessarily know the backstory before you tell me, but the way they're presented, I'm aware of like their importance. And I think you did a really good job of sort of showing because there are certain mannequins that you kind of hold when you're playing them, and then there's others that you're sort of more at arm's length with. I'm thinking, Gut Wrencher, I think actually got unseated in the video. And then but then there's some other ones that like Mantar gets really tenderly strummed and cuddled. And so so we're able to see all of those things. I think I was also something that I really, really like about this audio mix that you have for the final video is that at the end, all of these loops that you've created are really legible, which is something that it sounds like is important to you, because you're sort of introducing one element and then you introduce the next and the next, but things aren't disappearing. They're just integrating themselves into the fabric, if you will, of your sound world. So anyhow, it turned out, I think it just started out to be, I think even when you were talking about this in preliminary ideas, it was going to be a more kind of violent, in your face kind of piece. And instead it's this really tender, beautiful, subtle loops of audio. But there's a little screaming on the part of the instruments, but it feels they feel very humanized. And after watching it so many times and then looking at the various edits, I start to feel like I kind of know the personalities of these mannequins based on how you're interacting with them.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
I'm glad. So do you have, you were saying that you wanted to have someday like a fantasy orchestra of mannequins. How many would you have? I'm just curious, totally curious.
I think it would be incredible for there to be like 100 mannequins. In my head, there's just like
Yeah.
this massive warehouse, and you're navigating the space, and some of them are like self-activating and just doing their own thing and creating this constant rumble that you like walk in and out of. But then other ones, another mannequin thing I've made recently that I'm so excited about is this giant hoop skirt with hula hoops and chicken wire.
Yeah, I've seen videos of this.
Yeah, it has arms and you spin and the hands brush against objects on the ground and activate the objects. And like, I love the idea of having like 10 people wearing these hoop skirts, but some of the skirts themselves are playable. Like, I'm imagining some of them having like strings on them so you can like play the top of the skirt, or just have other types of things dragging on the bottom that are making sounds, or even like being in a fixed position where it rotates for you and there's specific bells in the ground, so it's playing like a music box melody that repeats. Like,
Oh, okay. So the
so
person
bad.
is stationary and the skirt is automatically spinning. Oh, yes.
I think it would be so fantastic. But then other part where there's like a bunch of mantars and a bunch of people are trying to play these unison melodies that I'm sure other string players could do consistently, but I'm not a string player and can't do consistently, and I like the idea of trying to play this like similar shape and having the minor discrepancies from instrument to instrument be amplified.
Yeah.
From their haphazardness. Like, it's gonna happen one day. It's gonna be this like massive mannequin opera where the mannequins are the characters and they're telling the story through these like simple and like haphazard sonic events.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to like see it or be in it, or I don't even know what to help support it.
I would love for you to play Mantar.
Well, I do have a lot of string knowledge, so that might actually push me out of the running.
I think it would probably be helpful to talk to even more string players.
You might want to push me into the, like, I don't know, percussion world where I have less fluency. You're wanting a true novice. Well, Margot, it's just been a joy to work with you and to support your piece, and we are so grateful to you for having essentially composed this whole new piece just for this Music for Your Inbox video. I think people should watch it and listen to it and just get into your world. It's tremendous. If you sign up for access to the video by the 15th of this month, we will send it out on the 20th. And also we'll be mailing out the postcards by Cindy Ream, who we're going to actually talk to next Wednesday. So if you can check back in and see what Cindy's all about. Somebody just wrote, M.A. Harms is for the people. Love it. Love it. I couldn't have a better sign off myself. So anyhow, thanks so much. Thanks for joining us today and for being you. And now I just want to see a giant mannequin 100% opera.
It's going to be so cool.
Let's find a grant. Let's do it.
Yes, please.
All right, well, take good care.
Thank you so much.
We'll talk to you soon.
For sure. Have a great day, Cassia.
Bye.